I am so conservative.
Rationalize in my head. These are things I read in the
I'm going to talk about Willow Creek.
Okay.
Willow Creek, a few years back, had
remembered at the time when Will Rogers said, I don't belong to any organized religion. I'm a Baptist.
Yeah. I am so conservative. If you just jump to conclusions, you might not get any exercise. I am so conservative.
Welcome to the On Webcast. Some states are opening for business while others seem to be under siege by their citizens who seem to disagree with their governors who are trying to keep them under house arrest. I don't know why that would be. The nation seems to be having an identity crisis of sorts, which makes me wonder, when all of us emerge from the safe spaces of our homes, will we recognize friends and extended family? Will social cues need to be relearned? Will anyone notice or even care that I am so conservative I can't turn left even when I'm driving? In the meantime, on social media, those who may be new to this webcast may still need a trigger warning. This is not a safe space for those who may be easily offended by having their ideas challenged. Today is May 6th, 2020, and this is broadcast number 188. Joining us this week is our friend and author, Carl Teichrib. In light of what is going on in the U.S. and indeed around the world, we thought we would take a look at the cult of world order. My name is Don Veinot. I'm president of Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc. in Wonder Lake, Illinois, which produces the Unknown Webcast, and our senior researcher and co-host and resident COVID-19 tracker is Ron Henzel, who will introduce the sponsors of today's webcast. And here is Ronnie Baby.
Well, greetings from sunny Florida, where the palm trees came out, saw their shadows, and now we have 12 more months of summer. Our sponsors for this webcast include two great faiths that taste great together, Reese's Jesus Buddha Cups, and, the Bible Buffet. It's not your father's worship experience, the Bible Buffet. And if you enjoy this webcast, or if it really annoys you and you just want to annoy people, others with it as well, to ensure your continued access to this program, please go to midwestoutreach.org, click the yellow donate button, and contribute as you feel led. And don't forget to subscribe to us on Facebook or YouTube. Yeah, Facebook, YouTube, what difference does it make? Okay, here we
subscribe to us on both. How about Facebook?
It would be better
and
if you
YouTube.
subscribe to us on both. Yeah.
And today of all days, we have our friend Carl Teichrib. Carl and I were talking a few weeks ago about COVID-19, and we have an interesting thing that happens whenever big catastrophic events occur. We have on one side those who start claiming this is a globalist conspiracy to create a one world government. We have on the other side those who are saying, oh, those conspiracy advocates are just out to lunch. There's no globalist conspiracy to take over the world. Is one right and the other wrong, or is the truth somewhere in between? Could it be that COVID-19 wasn't pre-planned or pre-engineered, but that there are globalists who will take advantage of these sorts of goings-on whenever possible? So we thought, okay, let's do something on Carl's book, The Game of Gods, which, if I can make this happen again, looks like this. There it is, Game of Gods.
It's exactly like that.
Looks exactly like that. And I have to tell you, it's not a short, quick read. It's a 500-page tome but worth every minute of reading.
Every split second.
Every split second.
It's like a euphoric, other out-of-body experience.
And so, Carl.
You just described the writing process.
Probably.
I like that, yeah.
That's all beginning to make sense.
Yeah, it does. So, Carl, is this a globalist conspiracy? The globalists in the background who are hidden, wealthy, powerful, invented the virus and unleashed it upon the world in order to take it over? Or are there no globalists and it's all our imagination? Or is the truth somewhere in between?
Actually, before we even get to that question, can I ask, imagine there's no countries. It's it's not hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for. And no religion too. Now, so the question a lot of people I think are going to have, even before you get to that, whether this is a conspiracy to create a one world government, is what's the problem? What is the matter with a one world government? I mean, what could be so bad? I mean, we don't see Pennsylvania declaring war on Ohio, right? So if we're all, they probably should, but we don't see it happening because we're all in the same country. So if we just, like, the whole world was just one big country, one government, wouldn't that get rid of wars? Wouldn't it get nothing to kill or die for? So, so how do we answer that even to begin with?
Oh, that sounds like a beautiful, beautiful utopian society, right? I mean, we could all have our hair grow long like this, and we could sing, and it's all kumbaya.
Yeah.
But Ron, your point is it's actually kind of important, and I appreciate the fact you brought that question up, because sometimes we just take we have the assumption that people understand the situation purely from a secular position, not from a religious context, but from just a secular standpoint. Having a one world government is not something that's favorable for a number of reasons. Number one, if that government is corrupt or becomes corrupt, assuming it isn't to begin with, where do you go? Where do you flee? Where do you try to find safety? The history, especially the history of the last 200-300 years, has been one of people fleeing from one oppressive regime or an oppressive situation to look for new freedoms, new liberties in another homeland. What would you do if that no longer existed? Those options were now taken from you.
What about people who say, like, for instance, Karl Marx said, just the very existence of classes and capital and all that kind of stuff is what creates our all the conflicts in the world. And other people will say, well, just the existence of boundaries and borders and territory, that's what gives rise to all these conflicts. So in other words, you're assuming that, this one world government is going to be oppressive and mean and dictatorial, when in fact they're going to say it's going to be the opposite. It's going to be a utopian paradise. So what do you say to that?
Well, and it very well may be for a short time. It's not to say that government doesn't have, that the government isn't always going to be oppressive. But at the same token, if it becomes that, assuming it didn't get to be that to begin, in the beginning, if it becomes that, where do you go?
Well, the moon is
what do you do?
Really, the moon is, I think Elon Musk has got some real estate to sell up there, and Mars too.
But there's another point to this too. Again, from a secular point of view, you can approach your local representatives at the state level. In my case, the provincial level. You can approach your county or your municipality. The next level up gets a little bit more difficult. In fact, the ability to approach federal bureaucrats, federal representatives becomes really difficult, almost impossible.
I can just dialogue with Trump on Twitter.
Of course.
He never really.
Yeah. Trump, he messages me like 5 times a day.
Yeah,
What do you
I'm
think
always
about that?
hearing from the guy. I can't get rid of him. It's like,
But the higher up you go, the more difficult it is to begin to have accountability, for you to be able to communicate. And then what system are you going to use? Whose worldviews? Whose values? Yours? Mine? What will that look like?
you mean
Let's take one more step backwards, because Ron started us on this trajectory, but it does get us to a point that you made already in our discussion prior to getting on here, and that is this. He started with a quote from a famous song that has in the line, "No religion too."
right.
Okay. If we move to a one world government, which in my view, and I think you would agree, Carl, is the goal of globalists, does that mean it is sans religion? Is it simply a political statement? What is it?
It is a religious statement. Ultimately, it's a religious statement, because the real intent of world federalism, the concept of one world, is that it becomes your salvation. It acts as Messiah. That's really the fundamental issue that we need to address. Is not what will it become or what will it look like. The very heartbeat of it is to act in a messianic capacity. So when I was at the United Nations Millennium Forum, this is going back now 20 years. It's just crazy. Here's my, there we go, my UN security clearance, my pass.
Wow.
Oh yeah, well, hey, it's it's your bona fides.
Did they? How do you know they didn't stick a microchip in you when you were there?
Back then, the microchips were much bigger. No,
They weren't micro. They were big.
Oh, okay.
But the thing that I kept hearing over and over again is that the United Nations is man's last great hope. It is mankind's final hope.
That sounds kind of messianic. That sounds
well. Yeah, I mean, Tessiadron, who was at that time he worked with the Baha'i international community, and the Baha'i international community, as you guys are well aware, has prophecies that the world will come together in a final great one world order, and that all religions will merge, and we're going to have a single global currency. The list goes on. The Baha'i faith is quite interesting because it has a political religious aspiration of one world. And so Tessiadron, who was with the Baha'i international community, was the chairperson for the United Nations Millennium Forum. This is how he began. Now, this is going to sound kind of like today in some respects, just minus the word millennium. As this new millennium begins, we are all increasingly coming to realize that in our diversity, we are one human family. The only way we can survive the challenges ahead is to stand together. The only way is to stand together. In this regard, we have no choice but to follow this path of global inclusion and to recognize and affirm our essential oneness.
No choice. Now,
I want to follow up on that with something that comes from your book. It is a quote that begins chapter 11, and it deals with the question of how long should this take? 50 years is ample time in which to change the world and its people almost beyond recognition. All that is required for the task are a sound knowledge of social engineering, a clear sight of the intended goal, and power. Arthur C. Clarke, Childhood's End.
Yeah, that's a good book. By the way, chapter 11, is that your bankruptcy chapter? We have something called Chapter 11 bankruptcy down here in the States.
Yeah.
We filed for Chapter 11. So
it's Chapter 11 is my political.
Okay.
But the quote that opens up chapter 11, a quote that opens up chapter 11 that's kind of interesting too, came from Scott Nearing. Scott Nearing was an American progressive socialist who had a big influence in the counterculture movement of the 1960s. But in the 1940s, he was pushing for a socialist America, and in his book, one of the books that he published at the time, United World, this is what he said: world crisis and world chaos cannot be successfully handled in the absence of world authority. And that gets me back to the issue of today, COVID.
Right.
Do I believe it was manufactured as a crisis? No, I think it's something that occurred. You don't need it to be manufactured. Pandemics and crisis of magnitude will come along. The question is now, how do you channel that in such a way that you can bring forward your own agenda, your own be able to take advantage of the crisis. So Gordon Brown, former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, just what was it, about 6 weeks back, said that in response to COVID, what we need is a world authority. We need a world government. He was very open about that. It ended up in the papers, and for a while it was circulated on social media, and he was quite adamant. What we need is some form of global governance. That kind of language has been floating around now for a few weeks, that we need some type of global response to this global crisis. Don't let a good crisis go to waste.
No. When I saw that name, Arthur C. Clarke, on that quote, it just brings a flood of facts about the man that, to me, he kind of embodied in the 20th century and into the 21st century. He kind of embodied the principle that I believe in, which is that people who think that a scientific, so-called scientific, let's call it an enlightenment science worldview. That's what I'll call it for now. People who embrace that kind of worldview are essentially religious people. So why do I say that? Well, Arthur C. Clarke embodied that. I don't know if you're familiar with the fact that he was the one who first proposed the idea of communication satellites. Communication. So here's a guy with bona fide scientific credentials. He's not normally, he wasn't thought of, at least by his peers, as some kind of weird person. But then when you ask the question, what does the ending of 2001: A Space Odyssey means? He wrote that book. He co-wrote the screenplay with Stanley Kubrick.
Right.
And what did that mean? And here's what he said, because years later, people were still asking the question, what did the end of that story mean? And he chose to answer it right before the movie 2010 came out in the 80s. And he said, the reason it ends that way is because I believe that if we were to encounter a species that had become so advanced that it was able to travel interstellar between star systems, that they would have been so advanced beyond us that even the encounter with them would be incomprehensible. They would be so far beyond us. And I'm thinking, Dr. Art Clarke, you're describing God. In other words, these people are these creatures, these advanced beings are your version of God. They're so far beyond us that they are, what is the doctrine? The incomprehensibility of God. So he can believe in incomprehensible aliens, but he won't believe in an incomprehensible God. And then at the end of his life, right before he died, the U.S. had put some satellites around Mars in place. I don't know if you remember this, but they were sending back some of the first images we had ever seen from low Mars orbit. These are very high definition images of the surface of the planet from a relatively low orbit, which is possible easier around Mars because it has lighter gravity and a very thin atmosphere. So we're getting some pretty sharp images. He was totally convinced that he saw in these images, he saw not just trees, but banyan trees. He said they look like banyan trees to me. He saw features on the Martian surface that he was convinced were vegetation. He saw what he wanted to see. So by the time the rovers get down there, they've been all over this planet, or they've been, let's put it this way, they've covered significant ground. Not only have they not found banyan trees, they haven't found much of anything that resembles life. So you have this religious, they don't want to say they're religious, but they are. They really
okay.
are.
Now, I want to interrupt just briefly because you're right. We're on this religious theme, and it's an important one, and we're hogging Carl's time. We want to get back to him.
Yeah,
and we're going to get back to no. Yeah, you road hog. Oh, road
no.
hog. I'm
Sorry.
showing my age. Because it is religious. Now, I kind of got involved with this in 1993 at the Parliament of the World's Religions, and it seems to me Carl probably was there, although we hadn't met until some years later. And George Mueller was there at that original one, and he had sort of spearheaded putting it together because he realized, being part of the UN for 40 years, looking for a one-world government, that you couldn't have that without a one-world religion, hence the Parliament of World Religions. How does that factor in? Well, they are working toward that end, and his second quote before Carl starts chapter 11 reads like this. Well, we are gods now, gods in charge of our own destiny, and gods can't be capricious. More strong, where on earth are we going?
Maurice.
What is he talking about, Carl?
Oh, becoming masters of our own destiny. Becoming masters of our own destiny at a global level. That we are the ones who now are engaging in global governance. We're going to be pulling together the system of management for the world. That's it. We're on top. I had the opportunity back in, gotta think now what year it was. I think 1998. Maybe it was 1999, to spend a day with Maurice Strong. He comes from my home province, by the way. I met him at a world government meeting in Dallas, and spent some time with the man. In fact, we had lunch together, and we sat and had supper around the same table, and had some really interesting conversations. But the belief here is that we're the ones who save the world. We're the ones who save the planet, which I'm glad you brought back the Parliament of World Religions. I wasn't at the 1993 one, but and then you and I were both at the last one in 2018. I don't know, Don, if you were there for the final statements, the closing statements, but one of them was on the salvation of the world. How what we need to do, and in fact, the I believe it was the chairman of the Parliament came out and thanked all of us for being saviors for the world, that we are engaged in the salvation of the world. That came out over and over again. It was salvific. It was messianic, and there was no hiding that factor. A few days before that, during the Parliament, I've got this in my notes somewhere, a fairly significant Hindu representative came up to the main stage. It was a little bit hard for people to catch because of his accent, but you just got to pay attention to what's being said. And he was very clear, though, what we need to save the world is we need a world government. We need a world parliament. We need a world constitution. He was very clear about that. So there is this incredible overlap between the concepts of world federalism, world government, and the idea of world religions working together, which is why in my book, I chapter 11 is on world order politically. Chapter 12 is on the extension of that within the field of interfaithism, because interfaithism is nothing more than a political form of spirituality.
And here's the irony I see here. The irony is, what are we being saved from?
Right.
And the answer is, ironically, biblical. We're being saved from ourselves.
Right.
We're being saved from our own sins, so to speak, but they're sins on the horizontal level. They're sins against each other and against ourselves. So there's a sense that is still in mankind that there's something wrong with us, and we need to have something imposed upon us in order to save us. It's just that it's only a partially correct diagnosis. We need to be saved from us, but not because of our sins against each other, but because of our sins against God, and not because of what we're going to do to each other, but because of what he's going to do to us.
Well, as Carl is well aware, the Parliament of the World's Religions, which is working to become an arm of the UN, by the way, and have created a chaplaincy even. I have wonderful pictures of that from not the last Parliament, but the one before that in Salt Lake City. Very colorful chaplaincy outfits. It's pretty amazing. But they, in 2000, issued a manifesto. Now, we are re-releasing an article we did in 2000 on that called Humbug Manifesto. And one of the ideas in there is, yes, we have to have morals which provide certain protections for people. But who gets to shape the morality? It isn't biblical morality. It is what they choose to determine as sin and not sin, right, wrong, whatever. So morals and ethics are strictly human created to facilitate the one world ethos.
That's interesting. I'm glad you brought it up like that, Don, because this concept of whose values rises to the top, right? So I'm holding in my hand, I have to read it to you guys. I'm holding in my hand a document entitled Sustainable Development for a New World Agenda. And it was a preparatory meeting of 3,000 world leaders who came together into Winnipeg, Manitoba. This is back in 1990 to kind of set the stage for the United Nations Rio Summit in 1992. Chapter 2 of the document, and I've read this a few times publicly before, but it bears repeating. Chapter 2 is titled, just so you get it, Towards a Global Green Constitution. Again, the question of values. Whose values? So here's salvation. This is salvation, values, and what we will ultimately look to achieve in one world. I'll read this. The issues are not about if a global politics is necessary. The question is, how do we achieve binding agreements in law, complete with effective programs for applying sanctions against non-compliance that would oblige each nation, regardless of size, to abide by a set of principles that are required.
How can we coerce them into?
That's right. Who are guarantee abide by a set of principles that are required to guarantee the survival of life on this earth. Perhaps we will find that there is no other alternative to a system of rigid controls that some would equate to a police state. Unfortunately, in order to save the planet from biocide, there have to be very powerful constraints from doing the wrong things. The constraints must transcend national boundaries, be world around and enforceable. There would be a need for an agency for preventing eco-vandals from acting unilaterally. Naughty, naughty, naughty. Enforcement agencies would need the power to act without being invited by the offending nation. By the way, that principle now is called R2P, responsibility to protect. Therefore, there needs to be an agency that is acceptable to all nation states on the planet. We can probably accept the fact that there will always be one or more nations that will not go along, but there must be effective sanctions in place. If sanctions do not work, then physical occupation and the installation of a world trusteeship would be imposed upon the offending nations. Now, keep in mind, that was a preparatory document to the 1992 Rio Earth Summit.
Wow.
What I find fascinating is because I spend a lot of time in preparatory materials, because it often gives the heart of what they're thinking in comparison to the materials that are released at the event itself. So in 1992 at the Rio Summit, you had Agenda 21, you had the Convention on Biodiversity, you had the Climate Change Convention, you had all this stuff happening. But when you go through the preparatory materials, then you realize the heart of it was actually even more open, more dramatic, more sensational than the materials that was publicly released and presented. It gets to the heart of what they're thinking.
And the thing is, I laughed about the coerciveness of the program, the fact that they're going to actually invade. They're talking about, they use the word occupy.
That's right.
But you can't occupy until you invade. Okay,
that's right.
And you usually don't invade. They usually don't say, oh, you're going to invade, well, then come right in. No, they usually shoot at you while you're trying to invade. So in other words, they're talking about going to war against people who don't agree with them. They're covering it up with these euphemisms, occupy. But it's really about declaring war on countries that don't go along with their agenda. Now, I laugh, people might say, well, don't nations do that all the time? Well, yeah, they do. They do it when they think they're defending their own interests. They do it when they think they're going to be attacked, or they have been attacked, or something is really threatening them. Okay, but it's never been the idea of a religious kind of apocalyptic belief that unless you get in line, the world as we know it is going to end, which is what they're
Right.
doing.
Right.
In other words,
Now,
yeah, go ahead.
well, I just want to mention we're talking with Carl Teichrib, author of the book Game of Gods, and his contact information is www.gameofgods.ca. Get the book. We have a link in the description. You can go get it there. And, part of the whole thing is trying to meld all religions together, that there is no difference, that we can really use them all alike. And one of our sponsors actually comments on that. They have a product.
To anticipate this whole thing.
Exactly.
They're very foresighted in this matter, and they just happened to notice that. So one day, Rob Bell was walking along, not watching where he was going, and he smacked right into the Dalai Lama. Bang. And the Dalai Lama said, "Hey, you got Christianity in my Buddhism." And Rob Bell said, "You got Buddhism in my Christianity." And it was getting kind of tense there for a minute. But then they decided that it's not all about truth, but experience. And isn't taste one of the best experiences? Two great faiths that taste great together. Reese's, Jesus, Buddha cups. And Carl thinks it's a funny for some reason.
Wow, that's inventive. That is creative.
See, when we have repeat guests, I never know which one they already seen. So
exactly. But it's true. That's the problem. Is that really does describe what we're talking about?
Yeah.
Right?
And, well, we're if we could all just get along. Now, in this case, it's not imagine no religion too. It's imagine. I don't know, even they like to call it tolerance. Okay. I like to think I'm a tolerant person. When's the last time I beat up on a Buddhist? Actually, I've never done that. I've never even really condemned anyone for being a Buddhist. I believe that it's not a good idea personally to be one. But
here's the problem before we again grab everything away from Carl. But since we have been working so much on the Enneagram, we released our book on it and we're dealing with it. One of the things that I kind of really realized is we have a big force pushing something called perennialism. It's a big word. Basically, perennialism means all religions have the core truth about God. We really share the same faith. It just manifests differently. And so you would have the Enneagram teachers, for example, saying, really, it's not all about the truth of Christianity. Just it's about the truth of being all you can spiritually be, the best Buddhist you can be, or the best Christian you can be, and you can sort of mix them together, and it's okay. And one of the things we point out in the book is, if you look at the history of the nation of Israel, I found this intriguing as we were working on this. The nation of Israel didn't outwardly reject God. What they did is embraced other faiths alongside of God's revelation and incorporated it into what they were doing.
Yeah.
Now, that is a rejection of God ultimately, but it wasn't overtly one.
I mean, when God starts out the 10 Commandments with "You shall not have any other gods before me,"
that's kind of a problem.
Something of a case there for where you're really rejecting him by having other gods before him. So yeah, it's very the word inclusive comes to mind, that this is somehow a virtue, and in many cases it is. And when they say that all religions share a core truth, I'm tempted to say, well, yeah, I believe they share some core truths. I believe that there's enough of the grace of God spread out among mankind that he keeps us from being as pagan and as apostate as we can possibly be. And, you'll meet people from all religions who agree that, stealing is not a good idea. Murdering other people is probably something you shouldn't do. In fact, they probably take a really dim view of these things. In fact, you could probably get in really big trouble in an Islamic country for stealing. You might lose a limb in some cases, I'm told.
Yeah.
So
Carl, here's the big question. Danny Cooper says, I had a UMC pastor, that's United Methodist Church, by the way, tell me that one, Islam and Christianity worship the same God, just in different ways. I almost fell over.
Yeah.
How does this impact in the whole question of the game of gods and the idea of the cult of one world?
Well, if we can say that ultimately we are all worshiping that one God. If you take it from that perennial perspective, which is to say there's really a mystical core that unites them all, then you should be able to theoretically, if you take your view along this line, you should be able to then experience oneness and have that politically expressed, religiously expressed, culturally expressed. Oneness should become then the operating principle. And what we're doing at that point is we're saying creation is all there is. Creation, what is in nature, is divine. And so the concept of oneism, being that God, man, and nature all share the same essence, that becomes the operating principle. Now, you can say that there's diversity in that, and indeed they will say that. Christians can have their own rituals. You have your own beliefs. You have your own structures, and especially on the progressive left side, because the progressive left side fits very much in the ideas of perennialism. Or the Muslim can have his views, and the Buddhist can have theirs, and so on, so on and so on. But what unites us all is this connection, this oneness between all of us.
Right. Now, the two Parliament of the World Religions ago, the theme was apologizing to Mom, right? To Mother Earth.
Oh, man,
Gaia.
No kidding.
They were writing cards apologizing to Mom for abusing her, and asking for forgiveness from Mom for not being good creatures.
But Mom has really gotten her. She's done a. Come on now, that hurricane.
Right.
I mean, these hurricanes, these earthquakes, these volcanoes. I think Mom has lost her temper a few times, and I think she owes us an apology.
Well, it's probably because she's depressed, because we have not really, giving her proper due.
Yeah.
What do you think, Carl? You were there. You and I had a wonderful time at that particular one.
Yeah, that was special. That entire week was special. But
now
yes,
go ahead. We had a couple of comments up. If you have something to say, Carl, I want to let you say it.
Well, that's fine. I was just gonna add that on the feminine side, we had the temple. We had a red tent temple set up at that parliament. We had the same temple set up at the 2018 parliament, where you could get in touch with your divine feminine side. Marianne Williamson at the 2015 parliament gave the keynote address during the women's plenary. And Don, I don't know if you were at the women's plenary. I went to the women's plenary. Wow, there was like literally a gush of emotions when Marianne Williamson declared that what we're doing was hurting Mother Earth, and when we hurt her babies, and Mother Earth's going to be mad at us, and you know what to do, go do it. And everybody was just, people freaked out. I had people beside me crying. There was drumming going on, and then there was the chant, "Marianne for president." It was pretty interesting.
That's how it started. Well, in any case, we had a couple of comments I thought were interesting, especially one, there's a lot of shaming that happens if you're exclusive. And I would say, that's true. It can happen. In other words, people who have exclusivist beliefs can use those beliefs as a platform to shame others for not having, or for being different, for not being being part of their exclusiveness. But as Christians, our exclusiveness is based on the fact, yes, we're exclusive. We believe there's one way of salvation. We believe there's one body of truth. But that body of truth tells us that we were pretty much as bad as everybody else was. We might have been even worse. We were just like everybody else in the world. We are without excuse. We have no grounds for shaming anybody. Go ahead, Don.
Here's my question to Carl. Is there truly anything that would be exclusivism? In other words, those who point to us and say you are being too exclusivistic, aren't they being exclusive in their view?
Yes, and I can answer that very solidly with what I have seen But before I do that, Don and Ron, both of you, this is important. God is inclusive.
Okay.
God is inclusive in that He wants all to come to Him.
Right.
But He is exclusive in that it is on His terms.
Right.
Because our terms fail.
So, in other words, when we talk about exclusive or versus inclusive, what we're really saying is that everybody is inclusive in some ways and exclusive in others.
Yeah. But when it comes to shaming, something I don't think I've ever been to an event. And I've been to, I don't know, 35, 40, maybe 45 different world events already, like events that have some global significance. And the Parliament of World Religions in 2018, I have never heard so much hate and anger and venom as I have at any event outside of that one. That one took the cake. Its theme was the power of love and inclusion. But if you didn't agree with the progressive oneness version, the hate for you was so strong. The language used against you was very adamant. It was in your face. And of course, because at that time it was the U.S. Presidential midterm elections, that also played into it too. As the Trump hatred was, I mean, it was in the red zone. There was a Sand Mandela, a Buddhist Sand Mandela. I should have forwarded you guys.
Just thinking about that, right? Yeah.
Yes, there was a Buddhist Sand Mandela done with the Hindu deity Kali, holding the severed head of Supreme Court Justice Kavanaugh, and the Buddhist Mandela was done by a Baptist minister angry at Kavanaugh.
Right. It
was so graphic.
Had heads of other senators and leaders, conservative, on a belt around their waist.
That's right. Those who confirmed him.
Right.
Yep. And then at the end of it, I've got this on video. At the end of it, they did an invocation to Kali to destroy Kavanaugh.
So a question
love and intolerance.
Coming in is, does the tone of these forums seem to be getting darker if one does not advocate their agenda?
That one was very dark. And in fact,
that one was very dark.
There was a lot of statements, and I put together a lot of notes on this one, but there was a lot of statements that were very upfront that if you're a capitalist, if you believe in the free market, you're the problem, you're the enemy. If you have a religious exclusive view, you're the enemy. The language there was very raw. And that one was. I've been to other events that have been far less that way. Other events where all of them kind of come together and they don't express it in the way they did at that particular parliament.
Right. They were quite overt.
They were very overt. Yep, very overt.
So, and you're saying it's not typical, or at least to that extent, but...
Well, it hasn't been in years past, but each parliament seems to become progressively more ardent in their rejection of absolute truth claims that do not conform to their ideas.
Well, I mean, they have their own absolute truth claims.
They do.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yep.
They do, but they claim to be, loving, accepting, et cetera, all inclusive. As Carl said, that was the theme theoretically of this past parliament. But once you're there, if you are not in the club, it is clear you are not accepted.
The other thing to keep in mind too is that the Parliament of World Religions isn't just a place for spiritual and religious leaders. There are a lot of influential figures from the United Nations, people involved in major political NGOs, people like David Corton from the Club of Rome. There was a lot of internationally significant individuals that were engaged in that parliament, demonstrating that it was really a blending of politics and religion. But that's ultimately what this ends up becoming. Even if you just take it from the purely pragmatic political sense of world order, world federalism, it still ends up going into a messianic role.
As soon as you use the word parliament and religion in the same term, you've combined politics and religion. Right.
Yeah. In 1999, I attended an interfaith conference in a United Methodist Church, and I talk about this in chapter 12 of my book. And it was in Washington, D.C., and it was a meeting between the World Federalist Association, which at that time, it's no longer called the World Federalist Association. Now I think it's Citizens for Global Solutions or something along those lines. It was the world's the United States' largest world government lobby and advocacy group, and it falls underneath the international umbrella of the World Federalist Movement, which is the world's largest umbrella organization for world government. And so this is just one of the little brochures I picked up then when I attended that particular event. And again, it's world government, world federalism, and coming together, religious faith and global action. And so at that particular meeting, it was World Federalist leaders coming together with some of the thinkers from the United Religions Initiative. And I attended the United Religions Initiative Global Summit in the year 2000 as well, and there were World Federalists that were in attendance, World Federalist literature that was being passed out. It's a real thing. In fact, I pulled out off the shelves my World Federalist activist binder.
Oh, there you go. And it tells you what to do to get the world to get
it's great. It's great. It's got the history of the movement.
What are some of the suggestions they have for activism? Some of the prescriptions?
Well, there's a lot of lobbyist ideas, because there's a direct correlation between the World Federalist Movement and the World Federalist Association lobbying with the State Department and with the United Nations. A lot of lobbying.
I mean, I've heard a term used a lot recently that I think applies here, and we probably should have used it a long time ago. And we should apply it not only to lobbyists but other groups like this. We're talking about pressure groups.
Yes.
People who their purpose in life is to maintain pressure until they get, and sometimes that pressure can be taken to extremes. I mean, I think of one of the more extreme pressure groups is Antifa. Okay, so their pressure gets pretty violent. It gets obscenely violent very quickly. In fact, they go prepared to do violence. That's the kind of pressure they apply. Whereas these groups here, Parliament of World Religion, World Federation of Do-Goodism, or whatever, they're trying to put political pressure from a religious point of view, because virtually every government on earth, no matter how much it tries to separate church and state, knows that religious people are part of their constituency.
Right.
So
now I want to describe something here that might help the discussion. When you bring up Antifa, one of the things that I have noted over the years is that we have a group that I call Middle America. Ron, you and I have talked about this relative to elections. Middle America is an interesting group. It's not a geography, it's a mindset. Middle America is mom and a pop, little Johnny and little Susie. They work 50 weeks a year. They save their shekels to go on a vacation. They try to put the kids through college. They are not activists. They are kind to their neighbors. They cut their lawn, their own lawn, to keep their house up. They're not pro-gay, let's say, but they don't want to interfere with somebody else's life choices. And so they just don't get involved with that. What they do not like is radicalism. So in elections, we see them swing always away from radicalism. If they perceive conservatives are too radical, they vote progressive. If they perceive progressives like Antifa is too radical, they vote conservative. Here's how this works itself out in this whole discussion. Antifa drives people away. The parliament does something else. They paint it up as loving and kind. Don't you want your neighbors to be well fed? We can accomplish that. Don't you want everyone to have a job or be supported in some way by the state? We can do that as a one world government. We combine all of our resources. Now that it doesn't seem radical, it is, but it doesn't appear radical, and it draws you in gently and kindly. Mm-hmm. And they would say, you don't have to give up your Bible. kind of sounds like somebody else. If you like your doctor, you can keep. No, if you like your Bible, you can keep your Bible. But you need to be aware it's inspiring but not inspired. You need to kind of pick and choose which parts really apply to your lifestyle. And we have a sponsor, oddly enough, that speaks to that issue.
You know, it's very odd that you should mention that, but you know, it's okay. Hold on a second.
It's somewhere.
Yeah, it's here. It's just, you know, it's
So it was
along.
it was closed for business.
I'm pressing the
We have to
button
reopen it now.
and
Yeah,
waiting.
okay. Uh-oh. We'll have to come back to that, I'm thinking, because it looks like Ron is having issues again this week. So, while we're waiting for him to get around to it, I had around to it and then I lost it. So what do you think of that description of how this operates? Is it more enticing to do it that way, to kind of lull you into accepting what they're doing instead of trying to beat you into it like Antifa does?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, that is, I mean, that's the accepted route, is to make it appealing, because it is appealing. It is appealing. They are presenting an appealing argument that we are going to be doing more for the environment. We're going to be doing more for poverty. We're doing more. Look what we're doing. When the reality of it is, they actually don't do that much, but it sounds like they're doing a lot. And who doesn't want to be a part of something where you think changes are taking place, where you think you're doing the right thing? Literally, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And
Right.
Those intentions can be played out, and those intentions can be manipulated. And my goodness, just the suggestibility of those intentions become a drawing factor for people to say, yes, that sounds great. Sign me up.
So now Ron is in Florida, and I think they have just now opened up this particular sponsor.
Everything, we never really closed. I'm just kidding. I think we did. Well, anyways, we got some questions for you. And that begins with this one. Are you tired of hearing all about the difference between the milk of the word and the meat of the word? Are you wondering when your church is going to get around to serving the ice cream and cheesecake of the word? Does your pastor take the whole Bible thing way too seriously? Well, then you need to check out the Bible Buffet. It's not your father's worship experience. Everything at the Bible Buffet is prepared with your comfort and enjoyment in view. Everything there is gluten-free, trans-fat-free, and truth claim-free. And all of their dishes are piping hot and ready to eat. And even in these times of shutdowns and lockdowns and closures, the Bible Buffet is always open. All of their dishes are available with Bible Buffet carry out. They're all piping hot and ready to eat. This Sunday's specials include Aryan appetizers, Sibelian succotash, Galatian goulash, Gnostic nut salad, and Pelagian pie. And don't forget, the Bible Buffet is a fully accredited ministry of the Church of Smorgasbordianism. The Bible Buffet, it's not your father's worship experience, but it should be yours. Check it out.
So, how does that fit into our discussion, Carl?
Well, I guess the question of truth becomes very relevant, right?
I would think,
absolutely. It absolutely does, yeah.
It is the discussion of truth. And even when we talk about things like something as some people would say as bizarre as conspiracy theories, and what we have been talking about is not conspiracy theory. But even as we look into things that circulate on the web, things that come into our social media, just some of the stuff that's out there, we have to ask what is true. And it's hard sometimes to unpack what is true. It's hard sometimes to unpack what is hype, what is sensationalism, what is partially correct, and what is absolutely false, because there's just we're inundated. I mean, I know you guys are, I am too, every day inundated with videos and articles. And can you check this out? Can you check that out? Oh, it is exhausting. I mean, I'm thankful for the fact that people want to approach us to say, can you help us sort through this? Help us sort through what is true, what is false. But there's a lot of stuff out there. That's for sure.
There is, and obviously we can't cover it all in an hour of time, especially when Ron and I sort of cut up as we do. But some things just need to be made fun of.
Absolutely.
Game of Gods, Carl Teichrib did the research and wrote this. This is 25 years of research and observation about what's going on. I would highly recommend getting it. And one of the things that I really liked about it, because I love history. If you've read anything we've written, I like going back historically because nothing happens in a vacuum. So I want to know how we got where we're at. What was the process that led up to that? And I think you would say, and we would agree, that yes, there are globalists out there who want to bring about a one world government. And it is religious in orientation, whether they realize that or not. And it isn't new. You go back to like even the 1600s on this, right?
I do.
So
yes,
as you read through the book, you follow this whole adventure of globalists trying to bring about a one world government / religion.
I do, and I mean, just this chapter 11 alone is it's really takes that and puts it into, it's a big chapter, I think a 60-page chapter with a lot of footnotes, that's for sure. But it needs to be documented. It needs to be expressed in a way that isn't hyperbole. It's not sensational. It's just, here are the facts. Here's the history of the movement. This is how it's come about. These are the individuals. These are the organizations. These are the tensions, even within their own world, their own community, that sometimes makes a very compelling story as to how they themselves think one world will come into existence and what that will look like. Gene Stapleton, I've used this quote a few times. It's at the very last page of that chapter 11. Actress Gene Stapleton, who was a longtime World Federalist advocate, along with John Denver, Walter Cronkite, Lloyd Bridges, the list goes on. This is what she wrote as an endorsement, an official endorsement for the World Federalists. And this speaks into the concept of that messianic nature, the oneness, all that we have been discussing. The goal of the World Federalists is peace through unity of government. We must support their vision of oneness in diversity, for it is the salvation of humanity.
Well,
now I want to pose a question to you. It's a hypothetical because we can't tell someone's motives for sure.
Right.
I want to preface it with this. If we want to point out where we believe somebody's in error, we need to understand what they actually are saying and properly represent what they are saying, even if we disagree.
Right.
Having said that, is it possible that the globalists, or even Gene Stapleton, have what they believe are good motives, not evil intent, but sometimes good motives can bring about evil results? Is that possible?
Absolutely, without question. And I've met wonderful people who have been involved in the World Federalist movement. In fact, I try to bring that out in the book. I'll even mention certain individuals' characteristics and how I've appreciated them. I have met some wonderful people. I've met wonderful people at the Parliament of World Religions. I've met a lot of great people at Burning Man. Just a few months ago, I was at Pantheacon, the largest gathering of witches and Wiccans in the world. I met some fantastic people there too. It's not that they all have bad intentions. In fact, a lot of the people are approaching this with good intentions and with a sincere desire to see the world be a better place. And they think that the road they're on will get them there or get everybody there. So there's both. That's there, but then you also see examples like what I read to you earlier, where you're going, okay, your good intentions become really, really dangerous if all of a sudden we don't fit into that that new perspective.
I'd like to point out something about what you just said. You say you've met wonderful people, and these people obviously are radically opposed to your worldview.
Right. But
you see them as, you can see the goodness that God has allowed to be in them by his grace. And you can see
absolutely.
That. What I see more and more of on social media is an all-out refusal to allow for that coming from the other side. Now, granted, there are a lot of Christians who do this too. So this happens on both sides. But what we face a lot as Christians, as part of the way the world treats us, and I don't think it's justified at all. The other day, I saw somebody on Twitter, not just one person, several people, basically saying that Mike Pence and his wife are horrible people. And really what it boiled down to is they were horrible people because of their beliefs. That was it. That's all they could. Now, of course, Mike Pence did put some legislation through in Indiana, which, of course, has been overturned and all that. Mike Pence was living out his beliefs with that. Was he right? Was he wrong? I don't know. But do these people know Mike Pence personally to know whether he's a horrible person? No. All they need to know is that he believes differently than they do. And that makes him a horrible person.
And they have strong motives. Now, Carl can attest to this. His friend Audrey is with us today, and as is James Lopez, who are both at the Parliament with us. And Audrey's husband, Brian, and James, this is kind of a funny story. Carl and I were down with the Indians as they were doing their opening ceremonies, singing. I'm not even going to go there. This is kind of funny.
And Audrey was with us too. Yeah.
Yeah. But we came upstairs, and James and Brian are engaged in a discussion with an attendee of the Parliament. And as we started talking to her about why she's there, what does she believe, very new age, talking about, her spirit is enlightened and all that sort of thing. And she made the mistake of asking me what I believed. And I said, I have to prepare you. I am a hardcore conservative Bible banger. And she stopped and she looked at James and said, and what do you believe? He goes, well, kind of the same thing. And looked at Brian and said, what do you believe? And he said, well, pretty much the same thing. And she thought about that a moment. And then she said, this is interesting. I am with 4 conservative Christians and I am not afraid. Mm-hmm. And so as we engage in discussion, I believe Brian and her are still in email conversations. All of a sudden, she saw us not as the enemy, but as people who simply differed in beliefs, but were not ill-intentioned toward her.
Right.
That was revelatory toward her. And I think that's one of the things that we, as Christians, engaged in mission to non-Christians, we have to understand they are just folks, not necessarily evil intention, who have a false view of our beliefs.
Right. Now,
and we need to be able to engage with that.
Something I started the broadcast with, I asked, okay, is there any problem from a Christian point of view with this whole concept of a one world government? And my next follow-up question that I was going to ask, but I didn't think of it, was, is there any passage in the Bible that might give us a hint about what God thinks about a one world government? And of course, there is. It's found in the book of Genesis. It's the story of the Tower of Babel, where man tried to create a one world government. And we kind of get the hint from that passage that God is not really favorably disposed toward this idea. And we also get the impression that if man tries to do this, God is going to make sure it doesn't happen. He's going to frustrate the plan. He's going to do something.
He kind of interferes, yeah.
He does meddle. And you wonder, why is that? And people might be asking, why would God do such a thing? And I think that we find the answer in Acts chapter 17 from the Apostle Paul, where Paul tries to explain this principle. And of course, he doesn't give the background, the sin background. He doesn't have time. They start jeering him. But I mean, the reason that God does this is partly because of man's sin. But he says this: he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling place. In other words, he deliberately scattered them and gave them national boundaries. Why? Why did he do this? Because to create a balance of power, to make sure that they should seek God. Right. And perhaps feel their way toward him and find him. Yet he is actually not far from each of us. In other words, this was part of God's grace toward all mankind, to give them the opportunity to do what they would not have done if they had stayed together as one a one world government.
Right.
They would have deliberately done what these people are saying they want to do, consider themselves their own salvation, look to themselves for all their needs. By making them scatter, God was saying, look, here's an opportunity to search for the one who really can take care of you, who can really save you from yourself. And it's not you.
Okay, now I want to do one quick look-see again here, and then I want to ask Carl for a wrap-up statement. So think about this, because it's in as short of time as you can, you're going to want to say, as a believer, here's how you need to think about those people you're ministering to, and maybe give them some pointers. But Carl's book is Game of Gods, and you can go to www.gameofgods.ca. Also, in the description that we have on this video, you can click on the link and go and buy a copy. I would really recommend that you do that. This is a huge mission that is missed largely by the church. We get kind of focused and try to figure out how to get unbelievers into the church so we can sneak up on them with the gospel. You know what? The young unbelievers are hanging around there in big groups. And when we go, Carl can attest to this, there's usually only a dozen or so of us who are there. And we have a free-for-all, and we have a great time with them and engage in some interesting discussions. So what advice would you give to somebody who's considering, maybe I need to get more educated, or I need to understand more, or how do we do outreach? Give me your 2-minute dissertation.
Oh, okay. The 2-minute dissertation, we're called to be ambassadors for Christ. We're called to be his ambassadors. What does an ambassador do? The ambassador takes, any ambassador in a secular setting, and likewise for us, takes the time to unpack the world around us, to unpack and understand the challenges, the situation that we find ourselves in. We first of all know our own position, our own power, our own legal authority. As ambassadors, you literally are the legal authority, the legal representation, pardon me, that's a better way of saying it, the legal representation of Jesus Christ here on earth. And then an ambassador takes the time to know the worldview that you'll be engaging in. You'll take the time to understand that culture, and then you'll begin to engage with them where they're at. It may be something as simple as this: going to a bookstore. And my friend Dr. Adair, who's passed away, this is what he used to do. In fact, this is how he ended up coming to know me. I was doing research at a bookstore. I was picking up some material from the New Age section. And he came up to me and he said, "Do you believe what you're reading?" I'm like, "No, actually, I don't." And it turned out he was a Christian, and that was his way of approaching and opening up conversations. Mm-hmm. So go to where people are and engage in a way that is honest, exhibits grace and love.
You know, it's interesting. I'll tell you a little story about my good friend, the late Norman Geisler. Every year he would go to something called Cornerstone Festival, which the best description is, though they no longer do it, is like a Christian Woodstock and a flea market. I mean, it's just interesting. 25,000 people camping out together for 4 or 5 days. Not something I would intentionally go to because I don't like camping with 25,000 of my closest friends. But I asked him one day, because they actually teach sound apologetics there with world-class apologists. I said, "Why do you go there, Norm?" He goes, "Well, I love fishing. It's my favorite hobby. And my favorite fruit is strawberries, but I never use strawberries as bait." Now, what he means by that is I go where the fish are. I don't use what I enjoy. I try to give them what they enjoy to get them interested. That's what you're proposing, is go there. Don't have preconceptions about them. They're sinners, but so are we. We're saved by grace through faith. God is, as you pointed out, inclusive. The gospel is for all, and it says that God desires that all should believe and come to a knowledge of the truth, right? So, and Ron, you were very compelling. It's well spoken. What is going on about this? So, Carl, I thank you. We're going to have to do this again. Maybe we should do this like on a monthly basis or something in the future, because it's a big topic, and we could do some good teaching to help Christians understand the unbeliever out there isn't your enemy. They are separated from God, and you have the cure. If you are but willing to learn what they believe and talk with them on a personal level. Carl, thank you. Again, the description of the book, the book link is in the description here. Order it, get it, contact Carl. Carl, where will they reach you at?
The best way to doing it is either at gameofgods.ca. There's a form that you can submit there, or contact me through Facebook or through Twitter.
Okay.
Right. Ron, would you care to walk us out of here?
Why not? It sounds like the right thing to do. Our resident cult leader profiler is Neil before me. Our wardrobe manager is See How It Fits You. Our culinary services come from Chef Ham and Cheese. Our tinfoil hat provisioner is Just In Case. Our Jehovah's Witnesses coverage comes from Armageddon and The Opposer. Our Mormon archives manager is Polygamous. Our liberal denominations bureau chief is Lucy Goosey. Our transgender issue coverage comes from Ben Hur. Our special correspondent for cults based on the Hindenburg disaster and flying turkeys, Ode to Humanity. Our fact-checking supervisor is Yoleg Pulling. Our technical assistance comes through Murky Research. Our legal advisors are at the law firm of Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe. Our grievance resolution director is Yvonne Pisami. Our director of privacy assurance is Wiretapping. And original idea sourcing comes from Drew LeBlanc. The Unknown Webcast is a production of Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc., in cooperation with Emergency Manicure Productions, both of whom are solely responsible for this content. Although you will never, ever, ever, not even once, be able to prove that in a court of law.
Won't happen. It has been great. We're going to definitely do this again in the future. Carl, say goodbye. Ron, say goodbye. And I will say
Ron.
adios.
Adios.